everybody, and welcome back to Cath Lab Chat. I'm your host, Jeremy Miller, and this week we are going to be talking about TCT. So, right off the bat, I'm going to be trying to do this a little different. I'm going to be trying to do a live video recording as well as the audio. So, those of you watching the video, it's not going to be as edited because I don't know how to do that. So we're just going to go ahead and it'll be one kind of seamless ramble shenanigans. Those of you listening, you're going to get the edited version. It'll be better, I promise. So welcome to my house. It's where I do this. This is my living room podcast studio. So moving on to this week. I know it's been a couple weeks, more than that, since I've had my last podcast. Life happens. I'm on call right now. I've been on call. There's been some long nights. That's the world we live in, right? So getting back to the main topic, while I was gone, I went to TCT, and I think we need to kind of talk about it. I know there's a lot of different versions of what people think about TCT as coming from a tech or nurse perspective. Bottom line is it's meant for physicians. So is it worth going? And I think it is. That's the short version of this whole thing. If you want to shut it off now, you can. I think it's well worth your time, your effort, your energy, the whole nine to go figure out how to get there, take the time off, however you got to do it. It's worth it. But I don't think you should just go. I think you kind of need to have a game plan going into it. And if you don't, it feels like a waste of time because it is a waste of time if you don't have a game plan. It's not as laid out as it is for physicians. Physicians can kind of really just go to anything that they're interested in and it's going to be aimed at them. So there's going to be a lot of that reference over and over again because that's the main part of this whole thing is that it's physician focused. So how can we as non-physicians get something out of it? Well, I think you just kind of have to start with what everybody talks about in the beginning, which is, the Nurse Tech Symposium. Obviously it's the biggest reason for us to go because it's our little invitation. It's our little handout to the non-physicians, right? And you'll find there's some, med students or fellows or residents that end up at the Nurse Tech Symposium just to get an idea what it is that we're talking about and to kind of, figure out where we are in the mix if they haven't really worked with us before a whole lot or they just want to know more about what we're interested in. So you'll see a couple hanger-oners, but 90+% of the audience is going to be us. And what is it? What is at the Nurse Tech Symposium? So you're going to start off from the beginning. You're going to start off at waveforms and hemodynamics and cath lab basics and going over waveforms for right heart caths and so on. And in roughly 8 hours, you're going to go from the beginning of a cath lab experience all the way through to complex interventions and structural heart innovations and FFR and IVUS and OCT and Dr. What's his name? The guy who does FFR talks all the time. He'll be Mort Kern will be up there at some point in time talking about IVUS and FFR and IFR and the new angio-driven FFR and so forth. And then they'll also talk about the new equipment and procedures coming down the pipeline and how they affect us, which is nice that they take the time to have this conversation with us. It's really nice. But what the point is that it's a lot. It's a lot, and it's jammed into 8 hours. This thing. There's barely breaks. So there are breaks, but it's heavy and it's packed. So right off the bat, what I wish it was different is I wish it was spread into 2 days. And I wish that there was more segments, like they divide it up into segments and they divide it up into 15-minute talks or so, 15 to 30-minute talks over the course of 8 hours. But I wish each of those segments was bigger and I wish it went a little bit more in depth, even in the beginning, even when talking about the right heart caths and waveforms and stuff. I think that there's so little at this whole conference for newbies that if you don't give them a full couple of hours to go over the pitfalls that every newbie falls into, that it's not that it's not worth it. I think that it's just a disservice to kind of go over, hey, if your preceptor didn't go over this, you missed it. It's helpful to know what you missed a little bit and kind of like a brief overview, but also at the same time, nobody's going to raise their hand and go, could you talk about that more? Because there's just not the time. So I think it's great. But this is the bulk of what you're going to get. And it's just so compact. And the rest of the conference is really broken up into, no more than 90 minutes. There's really no presentation thing that goes longer than 90 minutes. I think an hour is the majority of the sessions that are there, and that's a lot nicer to be able to break up your day into 60 to 90-minute sessions, and then kind of move around, because there's so much to see that it's easier to kind of make it custom to you. So if the Nurse Tech Symposium were to be broken up into 2 days into 60 to 90-minute segments that were a little bit more in depth, that you could hop in and out of based on what your needs were, and then you could kind of hop around the rest of the conference the rest of the day or whenever you're not in there, I think that would be helpful. However, with that said, I still think it's well worth attending. I'd like to see it bigger and better and more depth in the future, but this is where we are right now. Does it mean it's not worth it? No, I think you should absolutely go. So what else did we learn at the Nurse Tech Symposium? Well, this year I kind of learned something that I really hadn't been paying attention to, and that is that there are nurses and techs that speak on the panel at the Nurse Tech Symposium, and that's kind of a different thing. Like, if you're really not paying attention to it, you don't really notice it, especially since the majority of these guys speak so well that it's hard to pick them out. I mean, unless you read their first, some of the doctors don't even really put MD at the first, right off the bat. They don't identify themselves as doctors versus, other. And one of the people that was speaking I was so convinced that he was a physician that when somebody explained to me that he wasn't a physician, I was blown away. And his name was Jeff Davis, and he is the program director for the FSU program in Florida, and he's a phenomenal speaker. And so I think what we could see different, like I think what this year's TCT kind of brought to me for the Nurse Tech Symposium was, how do we create a higher level? Because we all know that there are some people who spend a lot of time and effort going deep into this. Yeah, you're going to have your every lab, you're going to have your high performers, your low performers, and your middle performers. And we've talked about that in another podcast. But how do you incentivize and reward the high performers? There's not a lot out there, especially if you want to talk about, unions and pay structures and so forth. Like, hospitals employ us. So there really isn't a whole lot to be done to incentivize those high performers to continue on, especially when you're in a silo. I mean, we've talked about that before too. Well, we all live in silos and we're poor neighbors and we don't talk to each other. So if you're a super high performer, I mean, maybe you'll get the top pay in your lab, but you may not be getting the top pay in your area unless you kind of shop around, and then you're having to job hop. And, I just don't know the best way to really separate the top performers in the field other than to create what I think are superstars. And these people that spoke at the TCT are obviously superstars. And I think being a speaker at TCT makes you a superstar. You have gone above and beyond to be recognized by some of the top cardiologists in the world to be invited to speak at TCT. And I think that above and beyond is way more than most cath lab techs will ever be in their life. I hope and to be a part of it some years, maybe next year in Miami, hopefully. I don't know. I'm definitely going to be working with Jeff and the others from the panel to try and see if there's a spot for me maybe next year. I think that is a goal for me going forward. That is something I didn't ever even think of. So I think we need to think about that as a group, as cath lab techs. We need to think about getting out there and breaking down the silos and talking to each other. So that'll be another podcast in general. Look out for that. That is part of what I'll be talking about later in this podcast, and what I'll be talking about in another podcast about networking and getting out and meeting other people in the cath lab community and breaking down those walls. So right off the bat, we need to kind of figure out how to do that, how to set some kind of precedent that there is a bigger and better thing for those who want to go further. Not all of us want to go into management. Not all of us want to go into being a rep. So like if you want to stay doing what you're doing, you just love the cath lab, which I think a lot of us do. Um, how do we continue to get recognized for continually advancing ourselves? Yes, it does better for patient care, and yes, it makes our job easier, and yes, we are recognized by our peers, but the physicians that do the same thing are recognized by their peers, and they become more acclaimed. At TCT you have your stars, your star physicians at TCT who are recognized worldwide for their contributions in the field and for being great at what they do. They don't have to write a paper or be a part of a study to become some of the best implanters of, let's say, TAVR valves or mitral clips in the country. And that in and of itself, becoming the best of something and figuring out the best way to do it and implement those procedures, that is something that is revered as it should be, and you have done no work in the academic side to get there. You have done just the labor portion. You've done the work portion. And I think that part of it is really valued in the physician community, and it should be valued in the tech nurse community. Like, yes, there are nurses that write papers. Yes, there are nurses who advance the field in that way. I just don't know the cath lab is one of those places that those nurses kind of hang out. I think academia in general is not something that the cath lab community kind of strives for. So, but that doesn't mean that we can't be a part of recognizing each other for advances in practices in the cath lab, or recognize people who have gained a large volume of knowledge. So that was kind of a side rant. The point being is that these people have gone above and beyond. I'm going to recognize these three people: Jeff Davis, Tom Maloney, and Ashley Copenheffer, who were all techs in one form or another. Ashley is a CVT, and the other two are X-ray techs. They've gone above and beyond, and they've been recognized, and they come back every year to TCT, and they're recognized for their knowledge and their practice and what they do. And I think that we all need to start striving towards that. And it doesn't have to be TCT. It can be locally. It can be getting into groups on our own. But that was something I really kind of took away from the Nurse Tech Symposium. One of the other things I took away from it is that the conversation at TCT is very different than what you'll think of or you'll expect going into it. I know that when we ended up getting into one of the later portions of the only day for the Nurse Tech Symposium, the conversation of if my mother needed a TAVR, what would that look like? What would I want that process to look like? Or let's say she lived, I think the example was, what if she lived in like rural Pennsylvania, 3 hours away from the local academic center? What are the challenges involving, screening and, follow-up visits and so forth, and the challenges associated with that with somebody who maybe doesn't want to drive 3 hours to go to the doctor and doesn't, is worried about the implications on their family and maybe who's going to be around locally to make sure that they're all right post-care. There was a great conversation about that at the end of the day, and they invited the audience participation in it. And I spoke to a couple of the people that were talking after the fact, and they were just as open to hearing what we were saying during the Nurse Tech Symposium as afterwards. They were all really extremely approachable, and they really valued the feedback from the audience. So when you go to the Nurse Tech Symposium, know that you bring something to there that they don't have. So not only are you going to hear what other people have to say, but they want to hear what you have to say too. And the more involved you are in that conversation that's going to happen at the Nurse Tech Symposium, the better off it is for you, but the better it is for the whole room. Like, you're going to walk away with more information because they're going to answer your specific example. So maybe you have had a mother that has had a TAVR, or maybe you have had that situation and a couple of people did. Maybe you want some improvements to your TAVR program that you can walk away from, and maybe you're a TAVR coordinator and you take some of these notes down of what the good practices are at these other labs. That's all part of this Nurse Tech Symposium. That's why I just wish there was more of it. I wish there was more of these conversations that you can bring home to your lab and apply to your practices. But also, it just shows you that there's a lot of people who are recognized at a high level, and these people are all really humble people who want to hear what you have to say. This is what they're into. This is what they're geeking out on. They care about the subject matter. And if you care about the subject matter, then they care about what you have to say. So it's a pretty unique thing that we can all kind of get together in a room and geek out and have these great conversations that end up benefiting everybody there. So is the Nurse Tech Symposium worth it? Absolutely. Could it be better? Absolutely. But if you walk away with two things, you'll walk away with some education, and maybe you'll have some people to look up to, and maybe you'll make some friends as references, or just some TCT friends. I think it's good to make those networking connections. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So what else is due at the Nurse Tech or the TCT for us? Watch live cases. I think this is super interesting. They could be doing all kinds of things that you're into, things that you're doing at your lab, things that you're not doing at your lab. But before we go there, we need to talk about the elephant in the room. We're not doctors, and in that, we are not going to be starting programs. Even physicians have a hard time starting programs. There's a lot of legwork that they go through to start a structural program. And even if you have a structural program, adding to your structural program can still be difficult. So if you're going to TCT and you're not a structural lab, but you want to watch 100 TAVRs, you can. By all means, go for it. Do I think that's the best, most effective use of your time? No. I think that maybe you watch one, you kind of get some ideas from it. But if you don't have a structural program in your pipeline coming down, I just don't think it's a great use of your time. I did this the first year that I went and saw all these programs that I thought would be really great for our lab, that would be a good fit. And if you don't have the physician to drive it, then you're not going to get that program. So as cool as it is to see the latest and greatest stuff, sometimes it's just not worth spending a lot of time doing. So go check it out. Sure, spend some time looking at it, but don't spend a lot of time. Really focus on what your lab is doing. And I mean that in the sense of go see how other people are doing your work, because I think that is what TCT is for. I think improving your lab is what TCT is for. So if you can go see somebody else's workflow, how they're doing it better, if you guys are, doing cryoablations, and, they don't really do a whole lot of that at TCT, but if you guys are doing mitral clips, and you got it down to doing a mitral clip in 45 minutes, and you go watch a live case and they're still taking 90 minutes to do a mitral clip, then you can say, yeah, well, our workflow is way better. And maybe you talk to somebody there and you find out, why is it taking them so long? Or maybe the other way, maybe your mitral clips take 4 hours still, and you're like, how do we cut down on this time? What can we do different? What are you guys doing more effectively than us? That is something that you could get a huge benefit from. Going to your CTOs and getting understanding a CTO breakdown, and having a decision tree with all the different wires and catheters. And, if you have a CTO program and every CTO takes 4 hours, maybe getting a decision tree with the different wires and microcatheters from another lab or from a vendor, that would be helpful. Seeing the types of procedures that you do at your lab at the live cases, that's worth it. Going to see the latest and greatest, again, don't spend so much time on it. So that's kind of where we need to go with this live cases thing. I think that you can see a lot. You can definitely, it's a lot. It's very, very cool. They have these ginormous screens. You have a bunch of really esteemed panel talking through these cases as they're happening, and you get to hear a conversation that most oftentimes happens in your physician's head, and you wonder where they go sometimes in their head, and they're having this conversation in their head of, the outcomes versus, the potential risks versus how far do I take this? How far do I push the limit? How far do I feel comfortable? How far have other people pushed the limit? What's the ultimate outcome? Is it worth everything? So I think, you're going to hear this all out loud. I'm coming from the panel, and then which approach is the best approach while you're going down this road. And, you start to get an understanding of all of the thoughts that are going through a physician's head that you may not be, privy to at the time. So I think that's really cool. And I think it's definitely worth your time. Well, like I said, don't spend a whole lot of time on cases you're not doing. Watch one. Like, we're not a big peripheral center. We do them here and there, but we're not, again, a super big peripheral center. So I watched one of the shock waves, which is the, I believe it's like ultrasound pulsed, like lithotripsy style balloons that you put up in the iliacs, and it helps crush the calcium. And it looked cool. I don't know if we'll ever do one, but I saw one case and I only spent about 20-30 minutes. However, I will say that starting your day off in the live cases is probably one of the best ways to start your day off. You can just grab some breakfast and head into the area and just kind of sit in the back and just chill out for a minute. Have a cup of coffee, watch some live cases. They're talking your lingo, kind of ease into your day a bit. That's what I ended up doing, and it definitely helped me out. Hitting up the vendor floor. All right. Again, this is the same thing I just talked about. Focus on what is at your lab. Focus on the needs of your lab. And this is to keep you from getting roped into existential conversations with reps that are never going to lead anywhere because you don't have the physician to bring on the business, so you're not going to need their product. They're going to offer you free stuff. That's great. Take it if you want it. I think it's just a waste of your time if you spend a lot of time talking to reps with items that you don't need. Myself, I was really interested in getting I always forget what that thing is called. The ceiling suspended lead. We have the mobile unit, and we're looking at getting it installed into our new labs in 2 years. So I was talking to the rep for that. That's something we use. That's some of our EP physicians are big fans of that. And, we are looking at adding it to a ceiling mounted system versus, the floor mounted system. The floor mounted system it takes up a lot of space. It's very difficult to maneuver. Our EP volume's going up, and we use it every case for them. It makes sense to have it installed in the ceiling, and we're gonna renovate our lab. So it's helpful to have that. I spent some time talking to them. I wanted to get the skinny. I'm friends with this guy, Brad Wilson, who is working for CathWorks, which is an angio-driven FFR computed system, and it's only available in California right now. And I wanted to find out, are docs interested in this? There's also, of course, CT guided FFR. I wanted to know what they had to say about, the other technologies. Mort Kern ended up doing the breakfast symposium with CathWorks and what he had to say about it. So those were things that I'm interested in. I don't know if CathWorks is coming to my lab. I know Brad is trying to make it come to my lab, but it was interesting to hear what the other vendors thought about each other, because it's this very similar technology system that I just don't know if the old sensor on a wire just isn't the most practical thing. I know some physicians have an issue with putting a wire down a healthy vessel and trying to see if there's a pressure gradient. I get that. But does it work the best? I think so. So far, everybody else does too. There's some arguments over that, but I found that to be a conversation I wanted to have on the vendor floor. And, there was different radial boards and drapes, and these guys over at TZ Medical, very cool. The owners are awesome. I hope to have them on the podcast someday. Spending some time talking about their products. They have a light that you put on a Army Navy. Dude, that's awesome. I mean, there's so many times our lights are out of position. I'm not trying to sell this thing. I'm probably gonna buy it. I'll probably buy a dozen of the things and probably use 5 of them until they expire. I think it's a great idea, and maybe it'll catch on, and we'll buy a dozen and we'll use them all, and whatever. We'll see. I think it's worth checking out. I think these kinds of things are things that I'm into, and that's where I wanted to spend my time. Very easily got distracted by people running these super oxygenators for patients with post MI or pre MI. I don't know. They were super oxygenating blood and then feeding it directly into the STEMI vessel, target vessel, and I don't know. I wasted brain cells there, and it wasn't worth the free cup of tea. So, is that Your day, man, dude, that was the longest day. I think that I had way more fun doing some CTO lectures that were a bit aimed way above and beyond me than I ever did on the vendor floor. It's kind of just exhausting. It is. So just kind of move on. Going into the training pavilion. The training pavilion, again, is for physicians. It's just for physicians. So there's going to be some vendors that have a little label right at the bottom that says, this one you can have allied health professional, and it's every third or fourth one. They might have one. Impella has one, and a few of the other ones have them. It doesn't change anything. Those training sessions that say for allied health professionals are the same training sessions for everybody else, but these are the ones that they'll let scrub techs in or nurses. It's the same presentation as the other one. They're not going to change the presentation and make it all of a sudden for cath lab techs. And largely the room is still going to be stuffed with physicians. So even if you are a cath lab tech and, going to this one that says that you can attend it in addition to, the fellows and the doctors, it's the same. So don't get your hopes up for this training pavilion. I thought it was going to be really cool each time, and I just thought maybe I was doing it wrong. It's just not for us. And the reps will tell you a different story to get you there, and then it's just not for us. They're really, really good at making these sales pitches for physicians, and if they can buffalo a physician, they can definitely buffalo us, because they're definitely just changing whatever they're pitching data, right? So whatever their study wants it to say, everybody knows statistics. You can make it say what you want it to say. When I bring the same data back to one of my physicians who reads studies all the time, he's like, no, it doesn't say that. It's a very low volume study, and I'm not specifically talking about Impella. I'm just saying that when you bring back a study to somebody who reads studies all the time and can blow holes through it, they're like, yeah, no, we're not changing our practice. So, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's a lot of work to get invested into something that may not work out. Was the Impella training useful for me? I thought so. It spent a lot of time at these intervals that were just not where I needed to be. Like, it spent a good amount of time. Like I never learned about pressure loops ever. And so I got a 0 to 60 or maybe a 0 to 100 training on pressure loops, real quick. And I think that's super cool. Was it worth the 90 plus minutes I was there? No, I don't think so. I mean, I definitely could have spent my time more wisely. So I would skip the training pavilion. Just don't go. Just fill your time with other stuff. Find other conversations, other talks that are going on that you might be interested in. Those are physician to physician. But if you're doing, like, if it's a CTO talk and they're talking about their decision tree or their platform for how they make decisions, or how they pick their patients or whatever, and you want to be a part of that conversation, or you just want to sit in the back and get a better understanding of what your top performers are kind of thinking, or maybe you can attend some of these lectures with the physician that's from your lab and then talk about it afterwards. Yeah, that's a great use of your time. Way better than you're going to get out of the training pavilion. And there are other ways to get training because the space is so expensive at TCT. The reps will tell you that they're just not going to make it. You don't have the buying power to be worth the space on the floor to train you or to get your attention. That's just how it is. That being said, they do have these after hours, in services or dinners or whatever you want to call them, cocktail hours. Some of them do have hands-on equipment. That's great, that are specifically made for techs, because it's much cheaper to rent out a restaurant at TCT than it is to rent out a 10 by 10 area for an hour at TCT. I mean, it's about $30,000, I think, for a 10 by 10 booth, let alone in a training pavilion area. And then, you have all these physicians walking around and you're basically going to ignore them. So there is some training for you, but just not at the training pavilion. And that's just the way that it is. So skip that. I would just say skip it. So there's two main things I think we should go over. I think the one thing that was really cool this year was, and has been cool, is they always have a keynote speaker at the main pavilion. and it's always worth it. The talks are always made for the entire room, even for the non-physicians. This year they had ZDog MD. If you don't know who he is, you should absolutely check him out. Sign up and subscribe to his YouTube channel. The guy is a legend. He's really trying to change healthcare. But it was amazing to hear him talk about the status quo now and how it needs to change, and the current setting to a bunch of people who are doing really well with the status quo exactly the way it is. So I thought it was great. I got to meet him, take a picture with him afterwards. He's a truly cool guy. I think I'll post that somewhere in this whole thing, and we'll see how it goes. But this guy was pretty great. So I think that's a good thing to check out. They usually have somebody famous. I think they had years past. I've seen some pretty cool people there. So what's the main reason you should go to TCT? My opinion, and I've been wrong about this for years until this year, has been networking. You should absolutely go to network. It's really hard to explain it to your boss why you should go to TCT, to meet people and potentially get jobs that aren't at where your current job is. But that's not it. You're not going to look for a job. You're going to network. And I think that's a big deal, and that can benefit you right where you are. Like just learning, breaking down these silos. Ooh, look at that. That's what we get right there. Breaking down these silos that we have in cath labs it's a big deal, and that's what we need to work on going forward. So how do we do that? We need to just get out and meet those other people in the field, and we need to do it at events like TCT where we don't have any walls. We don't, we're all there trying to learn. You're going to be amongst people that are invested in this career, and that this is how they want to spend their educational time. So they want to go to a conference, and some of them are traveling thousands of miles to get there. So they're really invested, and sometimes you might meet people that are at labs right down the street. I mean, TCT was at San Francisco. I live about 45 miles away from there, and sometimes I ran into some of my neighbors while I was there. And I also met some people from Seattle and Minneapolis and Florida and Boston and so forth. I think the network component is the biggest reason that you should go. You should make an effort to meet these people from these different areas and make long-term connections, because we don't need to reinvent the wheel at every cath lab. So if you have a top performer or you are a top performer, every top performer knows you shouldn't be figuring this out for the first time on your own. Like somebody else has done this job before. Somebody else has done this. So you could just reach out and say, hey, other top performer at other lab, how did you guys do this? Are you doing this? How did it work for you? Did you have any hacks? What did you learn along the way? And I'm sure they'll give it to you for free. Or if you bring in a new product and the rep is telling you something that just doesn't jive, or they're not telling you something, which is usually the key, because the FDA restricts them into using certain languages, and sometimes they can't tell you. They can't even nod and wink because it's against the rules. So you can call somebody else who's been through this and be like, yeah, we went through that same thing and this is what we learned. So meeting the other people there and making those relationships it's hands down the best reason to go. And it may be difficult to explain that to a medical director or, the education department or whoever, that this is really where you're going to get your biggest gains from. I mean, while I was there, I met the director of a lab in Sacramento. I met a couple of nurses from Santa Barbara and CVT from Seattle, and obviously a program director from Florida, and and all along down the line. And now I have those people to contact. One of the people I'm referencing is Ashley Copenheffer. She was one of the speakers at the Nurse Tech Symposium. One of the things she talked about was having a CTO box. They do a fair amount of CTOs, so she took and grabbed one or two of each CTO wire, made a box of it, and so that when you do a CTO, you bring the box in the room, and then at the end of the CTO case, you go and fill the box up again, so that when a CTO comes in, you can just bring the box in and you don't have to leave the room 80 times, because nobody wants to put every single CTO wire in every single room and in every single CTO catheter. That's a useful thing to have. And I have her phone number now. I can call her up and ask her, hey, what other things did you invent for the CTO room? Or what other things you have? Our CTO program is rather slow. So what would you recommend for our lab? She also did a presentation on, doing emergency carts versus code carts and what the differences are. And I think that our lab should look into it, and why their lab felt so strongly about it and the benefits that they got out of it. And I can use their presentation information that they used to kick it to pharmacy and start it in their lab. I can just get all of the information she had. She can send it to me for free, and we can get it going at our lab, and I don't have to reinvent the wheel to figure out how to get that started. That's the kind of thing that happens at TCT. Those are the kind of people, because these are the people that are, trending and leading the way in their own labs. These are the superstars in their own departments and the work that they have done. And rather than having them reinvented at every place, they can pass it on to you, and they're willing to. They've done this work. So it's absolutely worth it to meet and have these people, have these conversations. Tell them about your lab. Tell them what you have going on. Tell them where you work, how you do it. And you know what? Maybe you recruit some people to your lab. Maybe you get recruited. Maybe you talk to some rep who was like, I never wanted to be a rep, but now I am, and I'm super glad I am. And you were like, I really don't want to be a rep, and then you talk to them and you're like, well, maybe it's for me. And maybe it is. Ultimately, it's up to you to kind of have those conversations, but TCT is a great place to have those conversations. I think one of the other things that happens at TCT is that, you don't really know who you're talking to sometimes. And if you're just, being out there and, just being a friendly person, like I was checking into TCT on the first day and had some issue with my check-in, and I ended up going to the help me desk, and behind me was this other guy in a suit, and I ended up just talking to him while we waited for help. And, he's a rather cordial guy. And next thing I know, he was like, oh, I'm going to be presenting. And I was like, oh, what are you talking about? And he was saying, well, I'm going to talk about, laser and CTO and, using basically using it without a guide wire down. And, they've been doing it in peripherals for years, and I'm talking about doing it in coronaries. I'm like, oh, that's super cool. I'm really interested in that. Well, it turns out he's a world-renowned guy, and he was on every single panel for everything I was interested in, and he was more than happy to just have a conversation with some random dude at the check-in desk. That's cool. He'll probably never remember me, but it doesn't matter. Maybe he does. Maybe we have a conversation again in the future, and I'm like, hey, remember how we met up at TCT? That was cool to me. That's the way it is at TCT. He's a world-renowned physician. I want to say his name is Giroux. Where are you going to have that happen? Where are you going to have an opportunity to just bump in and start up a conversation with a world-renowned physician in your field? You're just not. And then have a one-on-one conversation and be like, well, what about this and what about that? And get that answered instantly. And he's excited to talk to you about it. And then I came back to my CTO guy. I'm like, guess who I met? This guy. And he's like, oh yeah, I know that guy. I'm like, and this is what he was talking about. And he was like, oh really? And this particular, our CTO doc didn't happen to make it to TCT this year. So I was bringing back that little piece. I'm not sure we're going to do it in our lab, but he might someday. And if he does, he could always call up that guy and ask him about it. I think one of the last things is that you can have some TCT relationships that last forever. Some people that always attend TCT every year. And I think that's a really powerful thing, that if you can get your lab on board with it, with, funding you to go to TCT or other meetings, and then you can continue to represent your lab. And that's a big deal too. You have pride in where you work. I do. I think my lab's pretty great. So you can make some relationships and end up going back to TCT and get recognized and be like, hey, Bill from, Cheers. And when you walk in, I think that'd be really cool. And it's really adds a lot of meaningful relationships to your life that you could have while expanding your career and your knowledge base and everything else that goes along with it. Finally, your reps. So this is kind of a catch-22 because reps are busy. This is one of the busiest weeks of their existence if they're at TCT. You should hit them up. You should have a conversation with them. Let them know that you're going. Maybe you guys go out to lunch, dinner, whatever. Their whole job is to create a relationship with you. And, they're people. I mean, there are great reps and there's not great reps. There's great cath lab techs and they're not great cath lab techs. I mean, they're just people. And if you like your rep, you should absolutely create a better relationship, because relationships work both ways. Yeah, they're trying to sell to your hospital, but they're just people. I mean, if you can create a good relationship with them, it makes all of this stuff it just makes it better. If you're good friends with the rep, sometimes they go to different companies, and like Brad Wilson, I talked about him earlier. I've known him through 3 companies. He was with Abbott for years, and he's a great guy. He's a great guy and a great rep. And now he works for CathWorks, and if it was anybody else, I wouldn't have heard a word they had to say about anything, but it's Brad. I know him. I have a good relationship with him, and I'll give him the time of day because he's a smart dude and I like him. And that's ultimately what this whole thing comes down to is, making friends. And if your reps are friends with you and they're in the position with a corporate card to, you two can go out and shoot the shit and have a good time and have some beers and relax for a little bit in this whole week of chaos of everybody trying to hustle and bustle and make a dime or learn something, that's well worth it. And those guys can have backstage access to some pretty cool learning opportunities, and they can put you in touch with some people. They can get some solutions for your tailored situation. And that's exactly what happened with me. I specifically asked Joey from Medtronic. He's one of my local reps. I'm like, hey, can you give me an introduction with so-and-so? And he absolutely did. Or I was talking to him about some situations we have going on in our lab, and he was like, hey, have you talked to so-and-so about that? And he helped me make those contacts, and now I have those contacts and I've hit those people up, and it was worth it. And going forward, I will do that again. And I'm not going to say that I haven't helped Joey make those contacts in reverse. I don't know if I have, but maybe I have. And it works both ways. But if you want to expand your lab, one of the best ways to do it is to get outside information in. And the only way you're going to get that information is for asking for it. People aren't going to walk up and bonk you on the head and give you the solutions for the problems that you're having. If it's turnover times, somebody else has had that problem and solved it. If it's, turnover in your lab, employee turnover, somebody else has had that problem and solved it. There's these solutions out there, and we can all talk to each other and better off, make each other's situation better. Wow. So that's about 40 minutes of this. Summarize. It's worth it. Go with an open mind. Talk to as many people as you can. Make a bunch of new Facebook friends. Follow up with these people. You never know what you're going to get until you ask for it. And if you're just there to benefit your education, you can't go wrong. If you're there to benefit your lab because you want to find some, whether it's product solutions to some problems you're having, it's worth it. If you want to go there and network and get a new job, you could do that. If you want to go there and network and not get a new job, it's worth it. I spent $400 on my admission this year and some more money on a hotel, and I don't care. It's worth it. I mean, we all take call, we all work overtime, and I'm highly invested in making my lab a better place, and I feel that TCT is a great tool to make your lab a better place. So absolutely use it if you can, and we'll talk more after this. So I'm going to let the video people go, and I'm going to hold on to you podcasters for a hot minute and just talk about thanking you all for continuing to share the podcast. I'm trying to carve out more time, but with a busy call schedule and a busy life with a baby and all that, it's tough. So if you guys have more ideas for podcasts, or if you want to be part of a podcast, I would love to hear from you. If you're an expert on something, or maybe you just have a lot of experience with it and you want to talk about it, or a problem that you're having that you overcame, I think that would be positive too. Or a silo situation. I mean, I look forward to talking to Jeff Davis from Florida, who has continued to break down the silos in his area by having conferences locally. I think I didn't really get to that, but I think that's something that I want to work on myself, as well as I hope other people work on too, and hope to do a whole podcast about it. Hit me up. I really want to hear from you guys. Leave me some comments, share the videos. I mean, we've already got over 1,000 downloads on just the podcast alone. Hopefully, like my boy Z-Dog MD, I can use this the YouTube channel to kind of create some more views there and expand the viewership. But again, guys, this is going to have to come. Some of this is going to have to come from you, and I hope to really have you on. I really want to engage more of you about what you guys are doing differently. I mean, my lab's pretty specific, so hopefully I can hear more from you, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.